Hi guys, welcome to the Tangled podcast. I'll be your host for the day. My name is Shubham Das, and today we're going to talk about interesting stuff. We're going to talk about things which have been on your phone, things which you have grown up playing, Temple Run, Flappy Birds, and all that stuff. And what are the mechanics behind it in terms of Android development? We have our esteemed guest with us today. Hi Rahul, what is up? How are you
Hello,
doing?
Das. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me here. It's exciting to come here.
That's great.
So,
So we are going to get all your insights about and all your stories about Android development. So I'm really glad that you're here. So right off the bat, what's your experience? Where are you right now, and like what's has the journey been like?
the journey has been, it's been an interesting journey, one that I definitely could not have seen myself doing. I got started with Android development on this little application that I just happened to find on the Play Store called
Right,
Sketchware. It had an interesting tagline: make apps on your phone. Seemed
right.
interesting. Picked it up, and it actually was what it said to be. It allowed you to
Mm-hmm.
make Android apps on your
Uh-huh.
phone. That was exciting. So that's where I
That
started.
sounds really good. Because I think that can inspire literally anybody to take it up because you make it sound like it's a very intuitive platform. It's a very easy to understand and easy to learn platform. Is that correct, or like when you started off, what were your initial thoughts about this?
That is absolutely correct. So when I started off with Sketchware, it really was an intuitive and easy to understand platform. It was basically the block programming. You must have
Right,
heard of the Scratch program where you pick
right,
loop blocks and plug them in. So
right.
the
Basically,
creator
like Lego.
basically like Lego. Yeah, that's I think
Right,
that's what the creators of Sketchware said. They wanted to make uh, they wanted to open up Android to people in such a way that it would be as easy as connecting blocks, and it certainly worked for me because I started there and
right.
I've gone from there to now to Android Studios, which is a professional tool, and I'm using that to work on my first professional project. That's been
Right.
exciting. It's
So,
a crazy journey.
so just for all our listeners over here, Rahul is a computer science undergraduate student. He's had over 4 years of experience in Android development, and as he just mentioned, he is currently also working on a professional project. But we are here to understand his journey towards that, on how he reached there. So before we go to Rahul's journey, let's first understand what this ecosystem is like, what development is like. So Rahul, if you had to tell me what all are the sub facets of Android development, what would that look like? Like what all encompasses Android development?
Well, so with Android Studios, I started to notice that there are different layers to Android development. Back on Sketchware,
Right,
it was all flat. I mean,
right,
everything was done in one place, and that actually makes it simple and easy to understand. But the layers that you describe, they start to show up when you start to build a bit more complicated apps. But then the simplest of the layers, two layers, they are present even on Sketchware, and they're easy to comprehend. They are first layer is the UI, the user interface, user experience layer, where you create what's present on the screen. And the other layer is the code layer that runs the code to describe what's happening on the screen. So if you have
right,
some data in the background, it's the code layer that's going to update the UI. The UI is just present on the screen, and the code layer in the background
right.
makes things happen. That's the simplest subcategories you can make.
So that's great to hear from you. It's amazing that you mentioned two important things that we have to discuss today about UI, that is user interface, and UX, that is user experience. So, a very interesting anecdote, and I was reading about this article, whereas we all remember what the old Instagram logo used to look like. It was a very brown, kind of notebooky, kind of very tokenistic kind of logo. And UI research, which is a very developing field right now, they found out that there are certain specific color tones which help enhance the experience of users. And that is how the Instagram logo was changed from that very notebooky brown color looking thing to what we see now, which is purple and rainbowish. And that's the general aesthetic which a developer builds. So, you as a developer, what are the things you try to notice about human psychology and human behavior which help you improve these kind of subtle things in your app which people don't just notice right off the bat? Like, what's your opinion on this?
That's it. That's something really important that you mentioned. I've experienced in this kind of situation where you try to cater the UI and the UX for the person, but it's not been kind of trying to understand how general people work. I have done this specifically for myself on a project I started last year at the start of college. So it was a simple task manager application which would help me prioritize the tasks I needed to do. I just entered college. I'd suddenly found I had to take care of a lot of stuff. I was a world away from my parents, literally on the other side. And yeah. And so I made a simple application that filtered my tasks into two categories: important tasks and urgent tasks. Once I made these two categories, I made a very simple app that didn't look neat, but it did this filtering of categories. And I realized there is something in this that works. There's something in that it works, but it did not work proper. It felt off. And it felt off because the UX was off. It had a rough user experience and it had an ugly user interface. So I'd spent 3 months where trying out different colors. So I'd trying out different color combinations to figure out what color combinations makes the list look good, what kind of text capitalizations. In some places, you don't notice this, but in apps, you have some places that exclusively use capitalized text and it just feels normal. That won't feel proper in an email. You're going to lose your head if someone sends you an all caps email. But you see that in a title, in an app, it looks pretty neat. So there was that. And then the user experience of how I input new tasks.
Correct.
And how, So
I think
go ahead.
Right. I think you bring a very interesting point, right? I think you bring about on how you as a user yourself are kind of pointing out what is much more comfortable to you. So this is a general observation that I've made, that these are things which young developers and startups are focusing on much more, right? Because if we look at already established applications, such as if you take into account eBay, right? There's a reason why Amazon took over eBay, and like now Amazon is basically the kind of king in that market, right? Because I think eBay is still like a moderate example, but a better example is our government websites, right? We think those have really difficult to access and difficult to navigate kind of user experience, because they at the time that was developed, user experience was probably not the primary motive. But as you said, now user experience is literally the start and end of development, right? Because that is who you're serving, that's your customer, and him having a end-to-end satisfactory experience is your prime motive as a developer. So I think that's a very interesting point you bring out. What do you think are general guidelines that people should follow during Android development? Like, what do you think are the do's and don'ts of developing a good user experience?
Try to make things just happen. This is what I learned from the task manager project I was telling you about. Is if at least what I felt would work for me is if I could minimize the number of button presses I had to do and things just worked in a few buttons, that was good. So because even if they are not clearly visible, or let me put it this way, let me put this sense. Sometimes the intuitive things, so when I started learning Vim, it did not look intuitive, but it spent like 3 days using Vim, and all of a sudden everything just makes sense and everything clicks. And similar things can happen. For instance, I had not the final product, Task Manager final product. When you look at the screen, it does not have a add task button. Instead, what it has a text view and edit text box, which is not by default empty. But as soon as you put stuff in, the appropriate buttons come in. And that's when you would expect the buttons to be there. If you don't have a task written, it's not going to be there and it's not going to consume space. Screen is really valuable. Sometimes in the effort to make things clear, you make things clearly visible on the screen. You put buttons, clearly labeled buttons and stuff. But then those buttons take up space. And if the button is not going to be needed, you might as well not have it visible at the time.
So do you think that in the yearn for becoming unique, or in the yearn for becoming the only one out there, do you think that it is not advisable to hold any kind of standards or take insights from other similar applications? Like, where do you draw the line? Because I think
Absolutely not.
as a developer, I think all of you do take inspirations from each other, right? Because even
Very
if we take
important.
even if you take task management, there are so many task management apps, so each of them have their own USPs. So where do you draw the line between being unique and taking insights? Like, where does that go?
So the lesson I learned from my previous one is it's not a question about trying to be unique and trying to be gain inspiration. It's more
Right.
about what's your current skill level. At the time when I attempted my previous project, I was not
Right.
skilled enough to create some of the really cool things I saw in my subject application, right?
Uh-huh.
And so what I was trying to reach far beyond what I was capable. Actually,
Okay.
thinking now not far beyond, but just out of reach. And when you try something that's just out of reach, you're going to fail. You got to keep trying so you succeed, but you're going to fail, and that's what makes the difference. Okay, so
I think you make a great point about about what your current skill level is, which brings me back to the podcast where most of our listeners are people who are amateurs or people who are beginners in Android development. So, what are your what's your opinion on the steps that somebody should take to get involved with Android development and develop that skill from a beginner level? So, what are your like 1, 2, 3 steps? Like, where do you start off? How do you build that skill? Like, what was the road you took, and what is the road you advise now as a professional?
for me with Android Studios, when I switched from a Sketchway to Android Studios, the thing that ensured I'm able to progress was a course I found, the Google's Android Development Fundamentals Code Labs.
Right.
So I found the course that I was able to follow. And what this does is when you have a lot of things you can do, you don't know which path to explore. It's difficult to identify the path. Having a course you can follow, having a friend who can teach you can make it easier to find a path that helps. Right. Alternatively, what worked for me is to find a simpler tool. If you cannot find, if you're not able to explore on your own with a certain tool, then try to, and you cannot find a course that helps you with a certain tool, try to find a simpler tool. Because a simpler tool, you might be able to exhaustively try out different things and still make decent progress. And then once you're there, you build your knowledge and move on to a more difficult tool.
So here's what I get from you, right? For any beginner listening to this podcast, the first and foremost thing he needs to do is firstly identify what his specialization is going to look like and what exactly are the things that he wants to explore. And I think a great starting block is Google Code Labs. You said Google is a big company and they are into developing, and I think that's a great course to start off with. Then you brought out a very important point about finding the right tool to kind of mechanize what your ideas are into reality. And a best practice is always to have a friend group, or at least some kind of people or some mentors or some peers to talk to you about. And this is where I think Tangled comes in, right? I think Tangled is a great peer-to-peer application where you have people of your age who are young, who are just like a couple of years elder than you, who can relate to what your journey is because they've just lived it. And I think they are the instructors who are going to talk about these kind of topics, and they are going to bring you what the insights are as well as show you what the correct blueprint to achieving these things are. So I think you bring out a great point about how a friend group or a peer group or a peer or anybody to walk with you on this journey is extremely important, and how Tangle can come into play. We spoke a lot about what the user experience looks like. Now I think we can talk about user interface also quite a bit, right? In terms of user interface, I feel that there are certain like applications which have their brand proposition, as in like Zomato's red, Facebook is blue, things of that sort. But despite that, there are, in terms of user experience, psychology shows that there are certain colors and certain fonts even that are much more appealing to the eye and which are much more likely to keep you hooked on. So as a developer, did you ever feel these things are constraints, or like you have to stick to these things, or like is there a leeway for you to make your own narrative and path?
So with me, I've not really made anything that has felt the need for having these kind of stuff, because up until my current project, all of my previous projects were for myself. So I haven't really felt the need to make apps that keep me hooked. In fact, my goal as an Android developer is to actively make apps that don't get people hooked. Because, well, here's the thing: I have used apps with infinite scrolls, and they are terrible for me as a person because it just sucks my time. Think what okay, I'm not on Twitter, but I used to be on Instagram. Think about Instagram, you can just keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And I believe
Right.
this is one of the psychological tricks where vertical
Right.
scrolling keeps a person hooked longer than horizontal scrolling. And so
Right.
I've looked at these things and I thought, I don't want my apps to have that. I mean, it might be stupid. It might be stupid in trying to make an app that's not going to get people hooked. But
Okay.
since my goal has always been for myself, I wanted
Okay.
to make apps that I use healthily. And so
Right.
I've actively avoided apps that keep me hooked. But still, there's a difference between apps that keep you hooked and apps that are appealing to use. Like there's a difference, and you got to understand the difference. And to anyone who to people who are building apps more professionally than I am,
Right.
apps that target lots of people, I think this
Right.
is an ethical thing that developers need to be aware of. That in the pursuit of making apps that are really appealing,
Uh-huh.
you got to recognize when you're making apps that hook you and do not let you escape versus
Mhm.
apps that you come to because they're really nice.
Okay. So I feel for the viewers of this podcast, I actually read up on two very interesting case studies, and this is regarding the future of Android development and future of development in general. So two very interesting case studies. So here's the bold claim, and then I'll give you what the reasoning for it is.
Okay.
The bold claim is we as a society are moving towards one single app. So here's the analysis. All right, it's a very interesting thing.
Heard of
So
it.
if you look
It's
at
cool.
so let's take social media apps. All right. So it all started way back in 2008 with BBM. Like BlackBerry Messenger was the first thing after a pager, which had a very unique peer-to-peer network of connected individuals. I think Facebook then went ahead and adopted this instant messaging amongst each other. I think then Instagram goes ahead and adopts this instant messaging along with feed posting. Then Instagram also goes ahead and adopts stories from Snapchat. Instagram has now gone ahead and adopted reels from TikTok. And this is just going to go on and on, right? There's no I think at a point in time we will have this one grand application which will just have all the features and like all the users and all the customers. Do you agree with that, or do you think that's way too utopic for me to claim?
Absolutely, I agree with you. I'm not exactly sure if it's utopian or dystopian, but I absolutely agree with you that this is a trend, and you can actually see it with other apps. Like, okay, I know there are lots of examples in China of such kind of apps, but the one that first came to my mind was, I'm sorry, I can't remember the app name, but I remember that Bhuvan Bham had advertised this app on his channel. Okay, so what the so you have apps that do food. Okay, you have apps that combine features from Zomato, grocery delivery, in payment like digital wallets, movie ticket bookings, and all these sort of things. And there's a reason for why this happens. If I'm remembering correctly from when I read about this,
Right.
is when you have one app that does all these different things,
Right.
you can have that app. You can have sub features of that app benefit
Right.
from knowledge about the users gained from other features.
Exactly.
And
Right.
yeah, so exactly. So you can have what's it called? If you have an app that combines, Zomato like features with movie ticket booking features, then you're going to be able to suggest, like when you're going for a movie, you're going to be able to suggest movies playing at theaters near your favorite restaurants. And that's amazing. That's amazing utility from one app, from an app. But
That makes amazing sense. Yeah, go on.
And here's the dystopian side. Okay, who collects all this data? All the data is going to be with one person. With
Right.
one app holds all of your data, and if that app gets, loses its integrity, then all of your data is suddenly vulnerable. And so the only force that I think might oppose this is people who actively try to secure their data, people who actively try to decentralize their data into different stuff. And
That's crazy. That's like a very great insight we get from you. So I think just as a thought experiment for all our listeners, imagine if the next big thing for Instagram is UPI payments through Instagram. So you're just chatting with your friends and like, hey, we know we just had dinner yesterday and you owe me 100 rupees or so and so. And someone just can pay you then and there, right? You don't have to open PayPal or Google Pay or things of that sort. right? Imagine, like, I think that's the next big thing. Just as a thought experiment, right? If you could integrate peer-to-peer payment within your social media apps, I think that was something which I think where it's going as a next new feature. But the second case study, right? I think the second case study involves things like Google and Amazon, where what Google, okay, we'll go to Amazon in the next question, but like what I think Google has done is that they have diversified to such an extent that now you have Google News, the first thing when you open your phone in the morning. You have Google reminder systems, like if there's a schedule somewhere on like a meeting and stuff, like Google will remind you. You also have Google Hangouts, whereas you can a video call, chat with people as an instant messaging alternative. You also have Google Lens, which is coming up, which is going to become a lifestyle supporter for you. You also have Google Assistant, which is already an existing lifestyle supporter for you. So I think companies, major players like Google and Amazon, are kind of capitalizing on the fact that they can develop a one time, like a one beautiful app standard for everything. So like maybe if I sit in a time machine and go like 50 years from now and I open the phone of a millennial of that time, his phone might just have one app which does everything, and that app might probably be AI run. So is that a good thing or a bad thing for developers? Like, what's your point of view?
It's definitely going to be interesting for those who are still developing. I can't really say if it's going to be good or bad, because here's an anecdote. Okay, here's how it can be really good, right? So when you have Google standardizing the stuff about Android. So in my current project, I had a need where I need to export a file from my application to another application, right? So the way this works is when you make your application, you create filters that your phone recognizes, and it uses that to identify what you can use and what you cannot, what your app can accept and what your app cannot accept, right? And so when you have one app that's doing everything, these kind of systems are going to be standardized. That means my application can interact with a third application which I have never heard about, simply because we're working on the same standards, and that's really cool.
So what apps or websites would you suggest to help someone like totally new to come into app development? Like, what is your favorite, and what are the other 2-3 websites you would suggest? Like, for let's assume I'm a beginner, I want to get into Android development after listening to this podcast. What are your top suggestions?
So if you are completely unfamiliar with Java, if you're completely unfamiliar with any programming language, then to be frank, I'm not really sure what you should do, because my approach wasn't from there. But when I started from knowing nothing, it was using the app called Sketchware. So you could try that. You could try using Sketchware for Android development. But then, if you have some familiarity with Java or any programming language, or if you're willing to jump into the abyss of not understanding stuff and walking in the dark, then I would recommend you definitely check out the Google Code Labs, the Android development fundamentals. That's where I started. And in fact, when I started, I wasn't totally familiar with Java, because up until that point, I had done some C++ coding. I had done 2 years and the block programming with Scratch and Sketchware. So there was an element of jumping into the unknown on the programming language side. But then you happen to pick it up as I happen to pick it up as a peripheral skill of just doing Android development. So what I guess summarize, don't start somewhere. I guess that's what start somewhere. There is going to be a fog of uncertainty, but start somewhere. And if you stick to it, you're very likely to start seeing the light in the fog.
Rahul, what is your favorite part about app development? Like, what excites you? What makes you wake up in the morning and be like, hey, this is something that I enjoy doing. This is something that I'm going to, use my time doing. What is that? What is that one quality of app development?
Surprisingly, now that I think about it, reading the documentation or like reading the Android. I'm really surprised that I'm saying this right now, that this is literally from my experience in the past 4 or 5 days, right?
Okay.
So when I'm trying to add something, right, I'm
Okay.
going to need references. So, for example, the YouTube, looking up how to do something on YouTube, or looking up how to do something on Stack Overflow, right? And while these are really nice tools, okay, the Android documentation, it's presented it's presented quite neatly, and it was difficult to understand. But when
Right.
something clicks, that moment when you're reading the documentation and something just clicks, that's awesome. You're like, wait, this makes so much sense. Why did I not read the documentation? This is so clear.
Right.
Why did I spend 2 hours on Stack Overflow looking for this problem when I could just read the documentation? And
True.
the problem, yeah, and the only problem with that is navigating the fog of darkness, like navigating the fog of uncertainty where things don't make sense. But it's that moment when you see the light. And that moment when you see the light in the documentation, I think that's what I'd look forward to the most right now.
Change. So with that, I think I want to come to my concluding questions. What's next for you as a developer? So you have reached till here, you have shared your journey with us, your ups and downs, your successes, your projects. Where do you see yourself going next? Like, what are the next steps?
Exploring Flutter. The next thing I want to do is explore Flutter. Like, thinking back right now, I kind of wish that I checked out Flutter first and not Android Studios. But then, since I'd already started Android Studios when I found out about Flutter, I decided to just run with Android Studios for now. So,
Right.
for those of you who don't know, so Flutter is a tool that allows you to write one project, and that same project works on both Android and on iOS.
Right.
Also, it also works for PC applications, Mac applications, and I think even for web applications. So it's
Right.
like you write one project and it works in a lot of different places.
Amazing. So I think that gives a good insight on where even the listeners who are a bit proficient in development can go, and like they can expand. So
exactly.
It was
and I'd like to add one thing.
Yeah, sure.
Just about the Flutter. For if you're not on Flutter and you're considering trying out Flutter, you should know that Flutter has separate documentations for new users, for iOS for Android developers, and for iOS developers. So depending on what your current state is, it has a separate documentation track to get you up to speed on Flutter, and that's really cool. So that's one reason I'm kind of excited to try out Flutter, because I have gone a little further down the Android Studios tree. I might as well benefit from what I've learned and use that to fast track myself on Flutter instead of starting from scratch. So you can do that too.
So all of our listeners, take that pointer, go to Flutter. Like, it's for everyone. I think, as you said, there are different documentations for different levels of proficiency and things of that sort. It was great getting a lot of insights from Rahul and learning from his experiences and kind of showing what the blueprint for your journey of Android development can look like. And I think that's where you also come into the picture of Tangled. And I think all of our listeners should feel free to approach you as a Tangled instructor, whether it be on Instagram, or if any doubts or any ideas or anything that they want to ask you, or in terms of sharing, because this is what I think this application stands for in terms of peer-to-peer network, for having somebody to talk to. So I think that's a great message to end this podcast on. With that being said, thank you. It was great having you here, Rahul. And this is Shivam Das signing off. Catch you in the next one.